you know, it won't alleviate all those other concerns because it's still a self-defense case at the end of the day.
Especially if you're a little old lady who's in a wheelchair who is fixing to be pushed downstairs by a gangster while he says, "You old hag."
What movie is that?
I'll let the people figure it out.
Okay. We are the Armed Attorneys. Today we're talking about a whole lot of fun stuff because they are your questions. We're going to be answering them. We're going to be talking about, can you legally hide a serial number? You know, where are we at on dash cams? Good, bad? What's the kind of trick to all this stuff? And can you store guns out of state? But before we begin, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting that like button. And today's video is sponsored by Aura. One reason we all receive so many spam calls and texts is that data breaches are happening more and more often. And what's worse, companies aren't telling us about them fast enough. In fact, Bank of America recently announced a data breach. What's even more disturbing is they didn't tell anybody about it for months. On average, it takes a company 277 days to report a breach. That means your personal data could have been exposed months ago and you're only just hearing about it now. And breaches aren't new. Last year, Citigroup and JP Morgan Chase both announced breaches. Your data could be compromised right now, and you could be months away from finding out. Do you want to give the criminal a 9-month head start? That's why we're excited to tell you about today's sponsor, Aura.
Or alerts me if they find my phone number, email, or social security number on the dark web. They'll also let me know if anyone tries to use my information to access my credit or bank accounts. And if the worst case scenario happens, Aura will provide up to $5 million in identity theft insurance to help cover the damages.
Aura also includes a VPN, password manager, real-time credit and identity theft monitoring, internet parental controls, and malware protection, all inside one app. And unlike other companies that take nearly a year to notify you, Aura works fast. Because let's be real, most companies' idea of helping is just offering a free credit monitoring after the fact. That's like installing security cameras after your house has been burglarized. It's great if you haven't been a victim of identity fraud yet, but why keep rolling the dice? Let Aura do the hard work of keeping you safe online. Go to aura.com/armedattorneys to start your 14-day free trial today. All right, Edwin Walker, thank you for joining us today.
Sure.
We're going to be talking about some viewer submitted questions, and y'all gave us some fantastic ones, and we really appreciate it. If you have a question for a future segment, leave it in this video. And what I'd recommend is kind of scroll through the comments, read the other questions. If you see a question that you like, give it a thumbs up, like it so that it kind of migrates to the top. You know, that's where we kind of source most of these things. And so we'd love to answer these questions. But I think we all agree this is our favorite segment. We got some good things to talk about. So I'm going to kick it off with you. You ready for a question?
This segment ought to be subtitled, "You're Telling Me."
That is a classic. For anybody who doesn't understand the "you're telling me" reference, and we've talked about it in videos past, this is when we talk to somebody, they give us a hypothetical like, hey, if someone's trespassing on my lawn, can I shoot them legally? And the answer is, if they're just trespassing, generally, no. And then they swap it out with some new facts. So you're telling me if they kick down my door and you know what, my wife, I just got to sit there and take it? They'd completely change the facts. Yeah. So it's very funny.
Basically, it's the patented response whenever the answer you give them doesn't exactly fit the narrative they have in their mind.
Yeah, so make sure we're all on the same page here. We got the questions here. We're going to read them out loud, and we're going to talk about it. The first one we have is for Dan Campbell. This was a super chat. Ignoring when a video evidence might work against you, assuming it's better to have it. What about cams from multiple angles? Or if both a car cam and body cam, would that help? Do you have any advice on the best types of cameras? Also, what if the police have to impound your vehicle and bring you in? Can you make sure that only your attorney gets the video? There are some cams that stream to servers so that the evidence can't be erased. Can you point to links and resources? All right, I'll start this one with, don't have any specific camera recommendations. We're not really the tech support guys. There's a bunch of fantastic products out there, but I think the big one that we can answer is, how can you only make sure your attorney gets the video?
Well, I was going to also point out that this question is very very pertinent because I have seen so many videos just in the last couple of weeks of multi-camera angles from Teslas
Teslas. Oh yeah.
being vandalized. And so Teslas come equipped with multiple cameras, kind of cool. So yeah, multiple camera angles, the more the better. I don't see any problem with that. Have as many as you want. I know that they do make cameras now that record both simultaneously, front and back,
Yep.
dash cams. So yeah, I think it's a good idea to have those. I think that the kind of the meat of his question is, hopefully, certainly implied in the question is, if you happen to be the bad actor or do something that doesn't exactly comport with your narrative, are the police going to find that? Are they going to be able to use it against you? If you know that it does contain something like, oh, geez, I shouldn't have done that. Can you prevent the police from ever finding that? And it's kind of a complex answer, and it starts with, do the police know that you have a dash cam or a surveillance cam that actually captured some video of the incident?
Yeah, and it comes down to, and Emily and I, we agree on this. Dash cameras capture reasonable people acting reasonably. They capture unreasonable people acting unreasonably. We all like to think we're a reasonable person. Sometimes, divided attention to task driving, somebody tries to kill you. Guess what? You get a little heated on these things. But yeah, if it's not apparent, so I guess this comes down to, I'd say cameras that aren't immediately apparent, concealable, discrete cameras, that goes a long way. Not telling the police that you have a camera, that goes a long way. And assuming you have discrete cameras, don't tell the cops about it. Letting your attorney know, immediately following one of these incidents, let your attorney review this stuff ahead of time before deciding whether or not, if at all, to disclose this stuff.
And recognize your own behavior. For example, for myself, whenever I'm driving, particularly in high stress situations, I let go with a monologue of profanity that would, shock a sailor. So if I'm involved in an incident, do I really want the jury to hear that?
Probably not.
Whenever the narrative was there. So, so like I said, if you're on camera, act like you're on camera.
Yeah.
Be aware of what you do.
Pretend like this is going to be played in front of a jury all the time, and I think you'll be okay there. All right, why don't you read AJ?
Alrighty. If someone lived in a gun unfriendly state but had property / a safe place at a friend's house to store guns in a gun friendly state, could they buy guns banned in their home state with the intention of it never leaving the gun friendly state? What is the difference between pistols and long guns? What about NFA items?
Yeah, so I will say this kind of breaks down into two things. Firearms that were legally acquired, stored out of state, really no issue there. All right, that I don't see any issues with that. The kind of second issue you raise is purchasing firearms out of state that would be illegal in your home state, storing them out of state. Well, out of state, the only types of firearms that could be purchased legally are from a federal firearms licensed dealer. They're limited to long guns. And here's the big bugaboo. Federal firearms licensed dealers in other states are required by law to ensure that the firearm would be legal in your home state. So they're not going to be able to transfer you things that would have been prohibited otherwise. And, as far as NFA goes, you have to tell them where these NFA items are going to be kept. There's kind of a lot to it, but let's say you had a trust with a co-trustee who lived out of state. You could both legally possess the items. I can see that coming up.
Yeah, trust would definitely help. But keep in mind, if you are, if you're a resident in one state, you go to an FFL, and FFL is required to obtain your valid ID.
Yeah.
And so whatever state is on your valid ID, that's what's going to control, regardless of whatever your other intent may be about, well, I live out of state, but I'm going to keep the gun in this state because I have safe place. No FFL is going to pay attention to any of that. They are solely going to be concerned with what state is on your driver's license.
Yeah, so it's an interesting concept. It's going to be hard to do legally. I mean, there are some things that you can do legally, keeping guns out of state, but trying to find your way around, getting around, hey, guess what? This is prohibited in my state. You're going to run into problems. They've kind of closed all those doors. You're not going to see that work. All right, the next one we have is Chris Muncie. He's a channel member. Richard Edwin here in Texas. There are some post offices and some Ace Hardware stores here in Texas. In some smaller communities, how does this play out? So I guess what we're talking about is legally carrying in a post office property, parking lot. But this isn't a standalone post office.
Yeah. How did Chris Muncie know I was going to be here today?
I found this one. This is-
Amazing. So, yeah, it is kind of a throwback to the old-fashioned times in smaller communities where post offices do rent spaces in stores. And the way I've always kind of answered this question, which we have been getting for
a decade.
many years now, is that the store itself is okay. Just be sure you don't transact business at the post office while you are in possession of the firearm.
Yeah, so let's give a couple of examples. Standalone post office parking lot, theoretically, parking lot included, off limits. Let's think standalone post office in a leased space. Let's say they have their own storefront in, let's say, a strip mall or something like that. Parking lot would be okay. Going into that location, not okay. Boiled down even further, we got our Ace Hardware with maybe a post office counter. The law prohibits carrying in a place where federal employees congregate and transact business. And so, you're going to get some spray paint in the Ace Hardware, boom, you're good to go. Transacting business at the post office counter in the Ace Hardware, not a good idea.
Yeah, and just a word, people should go support their local hardware stores. You can find the neatest things at your local hardware store. Stuff that Home Depot would never think about stocking, you can usually find at a local hardware store.
Makes me think of the King of the Hill where Hank complains that the Megalomart has cheaper screws.
Yes.
I got a family to feed. All
Yes.
right, it's all right. No, support local businesses, obviously. All right, next one we have is at Rob Holland 2722 question. Since courts have ruled that if the serial number of my firearm comes into plain view while the officer is making it safe, they may run the serial number. Can I make my own privacy by using something like electrical tape to obscure a serial number? So this one, huge caveat. So we got federal law. Every state is going to be different. We'll talk about federal law. We'll talk about Texas, and maybe some other states are very similar to Texas. Federal law, they care about obliterating, altering, or removing. So
Yeah.
is that obliterating, altering, or removing? Doesn't sound like that to me under federal law.
No, obscuring it. That's the thing about it is obscuring it can occur whenever it's in a holster. Obscuring it can occur whenever it's in a gun rug or case or so. Obscuring it is just simply too vague of a term for them to outlaw. So if you want to put a piece of electrical tape over it, go for it.
Well, check your. All right, with the caveat of not a crime under federal law and it's not a crime under state law. I would be careful. Look at your state's law to make sure there isn't a crime of obscuring a serial number, right? Right?
Right.
Okay, all right. Because, Texas, we have our tampering with the serial number law. And again, it's alter, destroy, obliterate, very similar to federal law. So in Texas specifically, if you were to put a piece of tape over a serial number, hey, guess what? I don't think that would be committing any crime. But, the question becomes is, if the police officer removes it without a warrant to access the serial number, discover some future crime, it would be an interesting issue at trial.
Well, certainly. And keep in mind, this would only come up in the event that your firearm that you're carrying appears on the lost and stolen gun database.
Yeah, I think that's a good common misconception. We have a lot of folks who say, hey, how can I check to see if my gun is stolen, or is my gun legal, or any of these other things, or will they know that, my wife is carrying my gun that I purchased? They're going to see it's not her, or it's not me whenever she, gets stopped carrying. The guns that the police are typing into their computers, those are only if they've been reported as lost or stolen. That's what they're trying to figure out. They're not seeing who bought the gun. They're not going to know who the owner of the gun is. They're just going to see, hey, this thing has been reported as lost or stolen.
And as suspicious as we may want to be, I can pretty much assure everyone that the policeman's not going back to his car with his little spiral notebook and saying, okay, serial number blah, blah, blah belongs to John Doe.
Yeah, we don't. Well, and some states even prohibit that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Texas prohibits it. All right, last one we have today is PS Robar. This is a super chat. What is a proportional response when you're older or disabled? I can't walk anymore, and a few hundred feet without a walker for a long distance. I need a scooter or a wheelchair. The whole reason I have guns is to deal with people who are stronger than me. Using force or physically remove someone is irrelevant when you can barely walk by yourself. This is a tough equation, and we've talked about this in the past.
Well, yes. And so the law here, specifically in Texas and in most states, have adopted the same principle that when you're looking at whether or not somebody had a reasonable fear, they will look at the basically the kind of generic definition is an ordinary and prudent person in the same or similar circumstance.
Yep.
And so the law does allow for a jury to consider the circumstances under which the individual found themselves, including age, disability, size, uh, being outnumbered, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and it's tough, and it's a really, I mean, it's a terrible discussion because, what might constitute force against a normal person, maybe that would constitute deadly force against our person who's in a weakened state. And so I'll say what it comes down to is being able to demonstrate that to a jury such that, hey, they put themselves in that person's shoes. They know, hey, guess what? This thing is going to kill me if I have to confront this person or if I have to defend myself. Generally, I'll say it is an uphill battle if the attacker is unarmed. That's just been our experience. If the attacker actually hasn't made any physical contact with I mean, we're talking about a weakened person here who cannot defend themselves, as scary as that is. The law's just not strong enough. And for that reason, I mean, we have filed a bill, it's filed in both the House and the Senate, that would expand our self-defense laws to clarify, guess what, injured, elderly, disabled folks, folks who are subject to aggravated assault, they would have defense rights because we know this is a known issue.
Yeah, and it's going to give the defense attorney a golden opportunity to kind of go off on a diatribe about how the state is prosecuting some poor, helpless 70-year-old who's in a wheelchair who has no other option to defend themselves other than, pulling a gun and using that gun against the person who's attacking them.
Yeah, but I'll say, I mean, all other good self-defense principles apply. It has to be reasonable, immediately necessary, has to be in response to a threat. We don't like people who kind of start the chain of events that lead to this use of force or deadly force. If there's some reasonable, safe alternative to using force or deadly force, obviously we want you to take it. It won't alleviate all those other concerns because it's still a self-defense case at the end of the day.
Especially if you're a little old lady who's in a wheelchair who is fixing to be pushed downstairs by a gangster while he says, "You old hag."
What movie is that?
I'll let the people figure it out.
Okay. But we had a ton of fun talking about this stuff. Make sure to leave your questions and comments in the section down below. Like this video, like the comments and questions that you see below, so we can know which ones to address in the next video. But until next time, we are the Armed Attorneys.